have done our job. That is why we're here today. We're here to take on tough decisions. We're here to make this farm bill better, and I'm proud of the product that we present today. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, and I support the underlying legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, the distinguished chairman, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. Well, I yield myself 4.5 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 4.5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by thanking Chairman Sessions and thanking the staff and the Rules Committee, both the majority and the minority, for their hard work in trying to put this rule together. I want to commend Chairman Sessions in particular, I think, for making an honest attempt for trying to include as many amendments as possible. There were over 100 amendments that have been made in order. And I appreciate the fact that so many amendments were made in order and many Democratic amendments were made in order. Unfortunately, some important amendments were not made in order, which means that those of us on this side of the aisle, I think, will have to oppose this rule. And I certainly also want to make it clear that I oppose the underlying bill as it is now written. But before I explain why I oppose the Farm Bill, let me begin also by commending Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Peterson and their staffs for all their hard work in crafting this legislation. It is no easy task, and they have done their best to thread a very small needle. I'm honored to be a member of the Agriculture Committee, and I want to support a Farm Bill. I believe this nation needs a Farm Bill. And indeed, this bill contains a number of good things. I'm pleased the bill includes an amendment that I offered in committee to close a loophole in federal animal fighting law that allows spectators at animal fights to avoid prosecution. I support the dairy program in this bill and believe that it would be good for dairy farmers in the Northeast, who are such an important part of our economy. But I cannot and I will not support this Farm Bill as it is currently written. I cannot support a bill that cuts the SNAP program by $20.5 billion. I cannot support a bill that will force 2 million Americans to lose their benefits. I cannot support a bill that throws over 200,000 American children off the free school breakfast and lunch program. In short, I cannot support a bill that will make hunger in America even worse than it already is. Right now, as we speak, as we gather here, there are 50 million hungry Americans. 17 million of them are children. Many of them work but do not earn enough to make ends meet. All of us, every single one of us in this chamber, should be ashamed by those numbers. Food is not a luxury. It is a basic necessity. But there isn't a single congressional district in America that is hunger-free. Ending hunger in America used to be a bipartisan issue. To my Republican friends, I say, remember the work of people like Bob Dole and Bill Emerson, who dedicated themselves to this issue. Be proud of that legacy. Don't dismantle it. And to my fellow Democrats, I say, if we do not stand for helping the poor and the hungry, then what are we doing here? There are all sorts of nice little deals in this bill for all sorts of people. Peanut growers get a nice deal. Cotton growers get a nice deal. Even sushi rice producers get a really nice deal for some reason. But poor people in America, hungry people, get a raw deal. It's a rotten thing to do, to cut SNAP by $20.5 billion. It's a lousy thing to do to throw 2 million people off this program. I will have an amendment later in this process to restore these cuts to SNAP in a way that not only reduces subsidies to big agribusiness, but actually reduces the deficit by an additional $12 billion beyond the base bill. So I would urge any of my colleagues who are concerned about deficit reduction to support my amendment. You know, we hear a lot of rhetoric about waste, fraud, and abuse in the SNAP program, even though SNAP has an incredibly low error rate. I promise you that if our defense programs had the same error rate as SNAP, we would save billions and billions and billions of dollars. Now, I'm going to have more to say about my amendment during its consideration, but I would urge my colleagues to take a look at it and support it. I'd also like to take a moment to ask my colleagues to support the amendment offered by House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Royce and Ranking Member Engel to provide modest but important reforms to our international food aid programs. This amendment will enable more people to benefit from our scarce U.S. dollars while ensuring that U.S. commodity producers and shippers remain actively engaged in alleviating hunger around the world. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that the rule makes in order several, quite frankly, mean-spirited amendments that do nothing but demonize the poor and make their lives even more difficult. I urge my colleagues to oppose those amendments, oppose this rule, and oppose the underlying bill. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Massachusetts reserves his time. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would hope that and I can certify that at no time during this process have we vilified any poor people. We're here to help them. The Republican Party cares very much about families and children, moms who are trying to make a go of it. We're the ones that are up here trying to lower taxes on everybody. We're the ones that are trying to make sure we got jobs for people. We're the ones that are making sure that we're trying to take pedophiles and rapists and murderers off the rolls of government assistance to those so that it would serve those who would need it the most. We're trying to help prioritize and save this system. That's what Republicans are trying to do. We would never vilify those that are disabled or who are seniors or who are men and women who richly deserve the opportunity for the government to help them. But likewise, we believe that those who are able-bodied, those who really should be getting up during the day and trying to go find work, do not take government assistance. And we are very concerned about the rights of seniors, about the rights of women, particular women that have children, and about children. And with disabled, I work very extensively as a Republican with other Republicans and with Democrats on a bipartisan basis to make sure that we're looking at those needs of disabled people. So I think it would be unfair to say, well, this bill is aimed to vilify the people that we're intended to help, and that's why we're here today. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to 3 minutes to a gentleman who is from Gainesville, Florida, and was a large animal vet. He understands a lot, not just about the agronomics, but also about the men and women who take care of this country in agriculture, people who spend their lives there, people who have to take care of their animals, and day in and day out the needs that it takes to make sure that we have the best farms and ranches in America, animals who are safe, and consumers that get a good deal. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman, Dr. Yoho.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleague from Texas, Mr. Sessions. This bill has been a long time coming. With over 3 years of reviewing every single USDA program, 11 audits, and hearing and 2 markups, we finally brought a farm bill to the House floor. And I need to remind everybody with a lot of bipartisan support. This is hugely important for the stability and the security of our nation's food supply. And without that supply, a nation like ours cannot truly call itself secure. I've worked in agriculture all of my life, since I was 16 years of age, and I've seen the regulations that stood in the way of farmers and ranchers, and I've seen the regulations that have made sure our food supply is the safest in the world. And this legislation cuts through the red tape by eliminating and consolidating over 100 programs while bolstering farm risk management programs so our farmers can keep feeding America during the tough times. I see a lot of theatrics and drama when we hear people talk about 50 million starving people in this country. I disagree with that. I think there's 330 million starving people at least 3 times a day. We call it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But as far as 50 million nutritionally deprived people, I would beg to differ. The SNAP program does not take 1 calorie off the plate of anyone who qualifies for the program. Let me repeat that. The SNAP program does not take 1 calorie off the plate of those who qualify for the program. We simply close the loopholes that allow states to sign people up into programs without the proper qualifications. To have a secure nation, we must have a secure food source, and I urge my colleagues to join me in voting for the rule and for the passing the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, let me yield myself 10 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 10 seconds.
I would just say to the gentleman in response, the Congressional Budget Office not me, but the Congressional Budget Office says that these cuts would throw 2 million people off of SNAP and over 200,000 kids off the free breakfast and lunch program. I assure you that people will lose food over these cuts. This is not something we should do. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Kaptur.
The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank Ranking Member McGovern and commend him for his work on this important rule. I rise in opposition to the rule, but frankly am relieved to finally debate a farm bill in this country. This past year and a half has been marked by far too much uncertainty in our agriculture industry as a result of Republican leaders here refusing to even consider a farm bill in the last Congress. That's hurt economic growth in this country from coast to coast. American agriculture is responsible for 1 in 12 jobs in our country and vital to give confidence to the market and to give certainty to our agricultural enterprises that we move a bill forward. Thank goodness the other body did it and we are compelled to do it here. But this bill cuts $20.5 billion in nutrition assistance that will cut over 2 million low-income people, starting with senior citizens in this country and with children who won't get school meals anymore. I don't know what the gentleman from Texas is talking about. I've invited him to Ohio before, and I hope he accepts my invitation. Simply, these cuts are unconscionable. Shockingly, the bill also has zero funding for the energy title. When American energy security is at stake and gas prices hovering at around $4 a gallon, to not invest in that is simply backwards thinking. I urge my colleagues to vote against the rule, and hopefully we can improve this bill as it comes to the floor for a final vote.
Expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to a leader on this issue, the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
The gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized for 2 minutes.
I rise in opposition to this rule and the underlying bill. It includes severe, immoral cuts to the food stamp program, slashing so deeply into nutrition support for hungry families at a time of great need all across this country. It is cruel, it is unnecessary, and it's an abdication of our responsibilities to the American people. Over the past 30 years of policies aimed at debt and deficit reduction, the key programs that help the most vulnerable among us to get by have always been protected from deep cuts. Recent example, Simpson Bowles. This has been a bipartisan tradition for decades, but this farm bill destroys that tradition. This bill slashes food stamps by more than $20 billion. It hurts millions of Americans in our economy. It will force up to 2 million Americans to go hungry. It kicks roughly 210,000 children from the school lunch program, and it changes the relationship between the food stamp program and the low-income home energy assistance program, which takes benefits away from seniors and from our families. Let's make it clear, you cannot get food stamps unless you qualify for them. There is nothing automatic about it. Food stamps are our country's most important effort to deal with hunger here at home. 47 million Americans are helped, half of them kids, and they are proven to curb hunger and improve low-income children's health, growth, and development. They have one of the lowest error rates of any government program. It's 8.8%. I tell my colleague from Texas, you want to find money in this budget, go to the crop insurance program, which is ripping off billions of dollars from U.S. taxpayers. That's where the money is, not where the program is to feed our kids. Food stamps are good for the economy. They get resources into the hands of families who will spend them right away. And most importantly, they're the right thing to do. Let me quote the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. 30 seconds?
Additional 30 seconds.
Thank you.
Gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
Catholic bishops, we must form a circle of protection around programs that serve the poor and the vulnerable in our nation and throughout the world. Harry Truman, quote, "Nothing is more important in our national life than the welfare of our children. Proper nourishment comes first in attaining this welfare." Let's pursue a balanced approach. I urge my colleagues, vote against this rule, vote against the underlying bill. Balancing the budget on the backs of hungry Americans, especially children does not reflect the values of this great nation, and it abdicates our moral responsibility in this chamber, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I appreciate the gentlewoman coming down and speaking. She was at the Rules Committee yesterday and really sat for a long period of time in order to have her ideas taken up by the Rules Committee, and as she knows, she's going to get a vote on what she spoke about today. This bill, it's not in there yet. She'll have a chance, this body will have a chance to determine whether we're going to go one direction or the other. What drives the behavior of all this is very interesting. We're trying to work with, on a high level, something that's going to happen again soon in this next cycle starting at the end of September, and it's called sequestration again. President Obama's idea about sequestration, which will cut $85 billion more across the board, and the entire government is struggling with how we're going to make these changes. Our GDP is at less than 1%. 25 million people unemployed and underemployed. We are working with the policies of the Democratic Party that are bankrupting this country. There are people who are hurting. There are people who need jobs, who need foods, need to take care of their families, need to take care of paying their student loans. This House of Representatives is on the mark of saying how we should solve each and every one of these problems. They essentially go back to when Republicans had control of the House of Representatives, United States Senate, and the presidency, where 60 straight months there was sustained, ongoing economic growth. Oh my gosh, that was under George Bush. Well, that's right. President Bush and Republicans helped this country to achieve a doubling of GDP, of moving our country forward. But there's also another model of success out there, and it was called President Clinton, who came and worked with the House of Representatives, who took Republican ideas, who took the ideas which we put and merged them with his own, probably called them his own, but moved this country forward. Instead, today, we have leadership of our country that says no, no, no. We've passed bipartisan legislation. Cybersecurity. What's the president's answer? No. We've come today with bipartisan legislation from two stalwarts, men who've served this great nation in the Agriculture Committee for years of service, bringing them together with the best ideas to try and formulate a policy. Today there will be examples of people who can control the destiny of these ideas. One is about trying to take off rapists, pedophiles, and murderers. Another that says we are not going to allow those that have won the lottery to be able to continue to receiving food stamps. That's how this bipartisan bill is being crafted and worked together. And every member of this body will have a chance to vote on the final direction that we go through amendments that were made in order by the Rules Committee. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I will give myself 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear that the $20.5 billion worth of cuts in SNAP are not about taking rapists, pedophiles, and murderers off the rolls. This is about going after poor people. And it is curious that we have an amendment to go after rapists, pedophiles, and murderers who are on SNAP, but not those who receive crop insurance, not those who receive agricultural subsidies. I mean, it's incredible what's going on here. I'd also say to my colleague that it was the Republicans' idea to have sequestration, and it was Republicans in this House that passed sequestration. But I'm going to give you credit that at least SNAP was exempted. It was exempted from sequestration and from Simpson Bowles because it was thought that to balance the budget on the backs of poor people who have nothing was a rotten and cruel thing to do. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Grisham.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I rise in opposition to the rule and the bill because I am absolutely appalled by the proposed cuts to the SNAP program in the Farm Bill. Now, I know how important the Farm Bill is to American ranchers and farmers and to New Mexico. ranchers and farmers. I want to vote for the bill, but I cannot support it if these disastrous cuts remain. For the past week, I've joined dozens of my colleagues in the SNAP Challenge to take a walk in the shoes of the over 442,000 New Mexicans, half of which are children, who have to eat less than $4.50 every day, to show just how devastating any cuts to the food stamp program would be. Nearly 1 in 3 children in New Mexico are chronically hungry. It's the worst in the nation. It's unconscionable, and these cuts make it worse. In addition to the SNAP cuts, this bill also cuts funding for nutrition education programs that teach SNAP recipients how to stretch their dollars further and feed their families nutritious food. New Mexico farmers, ranchers, and consumers need and deserve a farm bill. But this bill is morally wrong, it's cruel, and it's reckless, harming children, seniors, and the disabled, and veterans in the process. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Lady's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. Gentleman from Texas.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
45 years ago, in a now famous film, Edward R. Murrow for CBS produced a program called Hunger in America. It described 100,000 residents of San Antonio, mostly Latino, who were hungry all the time, and the indifference of some local leaders to their plight. This spring, with the inspirational leadership of Rod and Patty Radel, we rewatched that film, discuss the progress, and outline the remaining challenges. In one West Side zip code, we still have 40% of the population in poverty and over a third relying on SNAP. We cannot snap our fingers and snap away that poverty. But if we make these cuts 5 times larger than what the United States Senate approved, we will snap away food security from many needy families. People like Daniela, who lost her job and relies on SNAP to feed her young daughter. In San Antonio and Austin, a public-private partnership across this nation involves responsible corporate citizens like HEB to
for 30 seconds.
Working together with local entities to see that there's food security. But without SNAP, they cannot do their job. This bill has very little to do with reform and everything about denying a vital lifeline to school children and to poor Americans across this country. Let us reject it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind the young gentleman from Austin, Texas, that he'll have a chance to vote on this, and then we can make a determination. But it's pedophiles, murderers, rapists, those who should have enough money not to have government assistance. That's what we're trying to do here, and he'll have a chance to decide that today. Mr. Speaker, this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman, Congressman Rodney Davis, member of the Ag and Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, gentleman from Taylorsville, Illinois.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentleman from Texas. I will say that my hometown has no S. It's Taylorville. I apologize. But hey, Mr. Sessions has been there. So thank you very much for your time spent in that community, and thank you very much for the time today. I rise today in steadfast support of H.R. 1947, the Farm Bill. Thanks to the leadership of Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Peterson, we have crafted a farm bill that provides 5 years of certainty, cuts $40 billion, and closes loopholes in the SNAP program, and preserves crop insurance as the key risk management tool for our producers. Ag has been a bright spot for this economy. For every $1 billion in agricultural exports, it supports nearly 8,000 American jobs. The district I represent is home to ADM, the University of Illinois, the Farm Progress Show, GSI, and Kraft Foods. From the farm to the classroom to the table, agriculture is a crucial economic driver in the 13th District of Illinois. I'd also like to quickly highlight 2 amendments I authored which were included in the Farm Bill. The first one would provide the agricultural community with a place at the table when the EPA considers regulations impacting agriculture. This is how we stop regulations from coming to the table that want to regulate milk spills like oil spills from the Exxon Valdez. They don't make sense, and the Department of Agriculture deserves a seat at the table to tell them that. I also had a bipartisan seed amendment that removes duplicative layers of EPA regulations at our ports to ensure that we don't face shortages of seeds in the Midwest. Lastly, I want to talk about another vital title to this bill. The area that I represent has the University of Illinois, and those of us who are fortunate enough to represent land-grant universities know that they are the bedrock of agricultural research. With this Farm Bill, we are reauthorizing university research and continuing the Agricultural and Food Research Initiative within the National Institute for Food and Agriculture. Research through AFRI benefits the entire world, and I'm proud of the research that the U of I has conducted through this program. Their cutting-edge research is aimed at improving food security, achieving more efficient crop production, and promoting animal health through livestock genome sequencing. We have an opportunity to move the Farm Bill forward this week and avoid the uncertainty of year-long extensions that reform nothing and spend more money. This Farm Bill is well thought out, contains critical reforms, and benefits all Americans. Vote yes on this Farm Bill. I yield back, sir.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I have great respect for the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the Rules Committee, and I appreciate his courtesies in the Rules Committee yesterday. But I have to object to the way he is kind of characterizing those people who are on SNAP, kind of demonizing and stereotyping people who are on SNAP as somehow rapists, pedophiles, or murderers. It's just plain wrong. It's just wrong. Please don't do that. These are people who are law-abiding citizens. They're good people. They're falling on hard times. And millions and millions and millions of these people work for a living, but they earn so little that they still qualify for SNAP. So I have to interject that because these people don't deserve to be demonized. They deserve a helping hand. And, Mr. Speaker, I would also like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record at this time a letter to the New York delegation from Governor Andrew Cuomo opposing these cuts in the Farm Bill. And at this point, I'd like to yield
without objection, so ordered.
I'll yield 1 1/2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I want to thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me say, first of all, we used to have, or we have, in the part of the city that I live in, a statement that says, give us your poor, you're hungry, your huddled masses yearning to be free. We have poor people here yearning for food. Now, I have heard my very good friend from Texas talk about rapists and murderers, etc. But the the Congressional Budget Office, it talks about 200,000 children who will be cut off from this school program. Now, 200, that's not Democrats talking about it. It is the Congressional Budget Office that is talking about, and we as a country should be focused on the least of these. I think you judge a country by how you take care of the poor. Now, here we have clear evidence from an impartial group of about 200,000 children and hundreds of thousands of elderly individuals who will go hungry if we cut this $20.5 billion away. This is what this is all about. We talk about the future of America. Well, somebody within that 200,000 children who are hungry, who will not have the ability to learn because their stomachs will be crying out for some food, could be the person that could take us where we want to go as a nation. But what are we doing? In the name of saving money, which we are not, we're turning our backs on these children, on the elderly who have worked hard, many of whom came in.
I yield the gentleman additional 30
with
seconds.
the sign
Gentleman's
of giving us
recognized
your
for
young,
30 seconds.
you're poor and you're hungry.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, if I could inquire upon the time remaining on both sides, please, sir.
The gentleman from Texas has 16 minutes. And the gentleman from Massachusetts has 16.5 minutes. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from New York, who is a very dear friend of mine, spoke very eloquently about this bill. I will tell you that the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, known as SNAP, is designed to ensure that the neediest Americans are able to help themselves with food for themselves and their families. I care very much about people who are disabled, seniors, and those who are having problems. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any member who did not think that reforming this program is also the right thing to do. And this program was reformed in the Agriculture Committee. And that's the text that we're bringing here today. Republicans and Democrats together, working together, looking at the problem and trying to make sure that prioritization is done. But they also recognize this, that in the past decades, SNAP payments, otherwise known as food stamps, have increased by almost 300%. 300% is non-sustainable. A 300% increase puts huge responsibilities on public policy. And this is why Republicans have been offering ideas, and we continue to, about jobs and job growth. This is why Republicans see the terrible plight that the American family and the American people are in, trying to have jobs that are available in their hometown. And this goes to the responsibility of all elected officials, not just members of Congress, but mayors and governors and senators and, Mr. Speaker, presidents. People who are elected officials who need to understand that increasing food stamps of 300% over 10 years should be a national disgrace. We're not trying to take advantage of those who are on it. They're on it because they cannot find work. They cannot find an opportunity because of public policies that make work harder to find, because of rules and regulations out of this body and the federal government that are creating circumstances on employers to where they don't go employ people. We've talked about this for years. We said when we got into Obamacare, this will cause a tremendous loss of jobs. The CBO, we're talking about this organization CBO, predicted the same thing. Well, by golly, we can look ahead and see exactly where Europe is. And Europe is going through what is a tragedy where young people cannot find jobs. It is an international disgrace. You see riots across Europe and have. Mr. Speaker, we better be smart enough to recognize that we better reform our policies, not just in agriculture policies, but economic policies. Economic policies that help people, sure, to get an education, but then a thriving marketplace, not just through trade, but also through policies of this country. Our leaders, members of Congress, governors, vice presidents, presidents, and senators need to focus on this. We need jobs. We need job creation. We need the opportunity for every member of Congress to understand how jobs are formulated, how jobs are then formulated, created, and then saved. And we've got a group of people that are in Washington that I think fail to look at the ramifications of long-term unemployment to our country. They, I think, are more interested in what we're going to do for people who are having tough times. So I'm not here to vilify people. I'm here to say I suffer with you because I know them all over our country. I've seen them, not just in Taylorville, Illinois, but across this country. So what we're doing here today is bigger than just SNAP. It's larger than just the agriculture bill. It is how are we going to create a public policy that we involve all elected officials to understand about jobs, job creation, rules and regulations, and that we do not follow Europe, that we admit that Europe is the problem, not the answer, that we go back to the American dream, the formulation of hard work, the formulation of creation of jobs, and yes, I'll say it, even people making money so they can employ more people and give more wages. The free enterprise system. That's really the underpinning of what this whole argument is about today. A creation of a policy in this country that is about helping people that need help and about creating economic opportunity for a vast number of other people and making our country and the American dream work. That's what the Republican Party is for. That's why we're here today. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, just a couple of points to some of the things the gentleman from Texas said. He talked about the increased numbers of people who are on SNAP. The reason why is because we've had a difficult economy, where we had worse recessions since the Great Depression. Lots of people lost work. Lots of people are underemployed right now. And so that's why. And CBO tells us that, that as we look to the future, as the economy gets better, the number of people on SNAP goes down. So, this is there for people who fall on hard times. That's why the numbers have increased, and they're going to go down. The gentleman talks about that this bill somehow represents reform. This is not about reform. When you come up with reforms, we deliberate. And in the Agriculture Committee, in the Subcommittee on Nutrition, do you know how many hearings there were on SNAP? Zero. None. In the full committee, do you know how many hearings there were on SNAP? Zero. None. None. And then the language appears in the bill that we have before us in a markup. If you really want reform, you have to listen to people. You have to deliberate. That's what hearings are for. We have to reach out and figure out how to make this program better. I'm all for making this program better. But that's not what this is about. So let's not have anybody be under the misimpression that this is about reform. This really is about trying to find an offset, to be able to pay for all the other things and to try to use this to help kind of balance the budget. We're not going after big agribusiness. We're not going after crop insurance. What we're doing is we're going after poor people. They don't have super PACs. They don't have big lobbyists down here. So there's no political repercussions. That's what this is about. Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, a leader on this issue, Mr. Deutsch.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my friend from Massachusetts. I'd like to just highlight a point that he just made that my friend from Texas and everyone understands, and that is that, of course, SNAP payments increased during the recession. It is supplemental nutrition. And it's that supplemental nutrition assistance that kept people out of poverty. The majority ruled out of order my amendment to the Farm Bill to ensure families relying on SNAP could skip fewer meals and buy healthier food. And contrary to my colleagues' claims, SNAP is not too generous, and processed food from the dollar store can't replace fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and the protein needed in a healthy diet. So, as the Republican majority prepares to vote to kick 2 million Americans off of SNAP, let's remember what they're not voting for. What they're not voting for today, and what they've not voted for one single day in this Congress. The GOP is not voting for jobs. They're not voting to raise the minimum wage so that full-time workers can actually feed their kids without SNAP. They're not voting to invest in education so that children have a better shot at success.
They're not voting to create new jobs by investing in new ports and new bridges and new roads. In short, my friends on the other side of the aisle are not voting to reduce poverty. They're not voting to reduce hunger. They're not voting to build an economy where working families can get ahead and don't have to scrape by on SNAP benefits. The Democratic plan for reducing SNAP spending: create jobs, build a stronger economy, and stop punishing poor people. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Good job. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Hahn.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. You know, I wasn't able to attend my usual Congressional Women's Bible Study this morning, but I'm still feeling the command of the Scripture. And so today, as we begin consideration of the House Farm Bill, the Farm Bill that takes $20 billion from the hungry in cuts to SNAP, $20 billion from the plates of fellow Americans who are struggling to feed themselves even with this meager benefit, I am holding in mind the words of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew. Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. In my communities alone, 145,000 people rely on this benefit. Over half of them are children. This bill takes food from their mouths. I hope all my colleagues will remember what that means and join me in supporting the McGovern amendment to reverse these cuts, or else vote down this immoral bill.
Backer time. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of issues that the House will be considering today as a result of amendments, ideas that come to not just the committee, and some that are in the bill and some that are amendments against the bill. And I'd like to, if I can, speak on one of those amendments at this time. And this amendment is Amendment number 194, and it's offered by the gentleman who is the former chairman of the committee and now the chairman of the Committee on Judiciary, Mr. Goodlatte, and it's co-sponsored by a number of members of this House, including the gentleman David Scott, Chris Collins of New York, David Scott of Georgia, Chris Collins of New York, Mr. Moran, Mr. Duffy, Mr. Polis, Mr. Kaufman, Mr. Meeks, Ms. Lee, Ms. DeGette, Mr. Issa, and myself. And the essence of what this is all about is it would repeal the dairy market subsidization program. And this program serves as a supply and control mechanism which distorts the private markets through which government intervention takes place and which unnecessarily fixes prices. As a result, American families pay higher prices for milk products, and American dairy exports are unnecessarily limited. And this amendment, which I speak of, 194, known as the Goodlatte Amendment, would replace the stabilization program with a voluntary margin insurance program, allowing producers to effectively manage their risk without unnecessary government intervention. This government intervention that will simply rise prices for consumers. It's an important amendment. It's drawn a lot of attention, and I would like to stand up and offer my support, since I will not be here probably for the discussion of the bill at the time that the amendment comes up. I lend my support because I think this is one of the most critical piece parts to put the free market and the opportunities for reducing cost, bettering the services and products that are available, and helping keep America in the export market to where we're more competitive in the world marketplace. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense free market amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a letter to the Congress from Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick opposing the cuts that are contained in the Farm Bill.
Without objection.
At this time, it's my pleasure to yield to another leader on this issue, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, 2 minutes.
The gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman who has been such a tremendous leader and head of our Hunger Caucus in the House of Representatives. Hunger in America, think of that. It ought to be a non sequitur. This is the richest country in the world, and yet 1 out of 4 of our children in this country is considered food insecure. That means that there are nights in this country where tens of thousands of children go to sleep hungry, American children. And so despite what the gentleman from Texas may say about the compassion for these children, 2 million people will be cut off of the food stamp program, and not all of them are rapists and murderers. They are children, they are senior citizens, they are people who go to work every day and yet can't afford to eat. I'm just finishing a week of living on the average food stamp or SNAP budget. $31.50 a week, $4.50 a day. You can spend $4.50 a day for 1 coffee at a Starbucks. It's not easy to live on that. That is the average food stamp benefit. You know, it's just inconceivable to me that anyone has come to Congress with the idea that they would be willing to take food out of the mouths of hungry children. Because it's not just the SNAP program, but it's also school lunch programs, school breakfast programs. 200 children are going to be cut off of those programs. Are you kidding me? This is what we're going to do. This is what the majority is going to vote for to do in our country. These are working people, often who have come over a rough time. I talked to a woman on SNAP who said she saw it as a trampoline. She was able to get over a rough spot in her life for herself and her children through the SNAP program. Voting for this cut is immoral. It is wrong. We should be voting against this cut, against the Farm Bill.
Gentlelady, time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman from Texas has 7 minutes. The gentleman from Massachusetts has 10.5 minutes.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of the more than 47 million Americans who rely on nutrition assistance and in opposition strongly to the deep, unnecessary and cruel cuts to these anti-hunger programs in the Farm Bill. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is one of our nation's most effective tools for lifting children, seniors and families out of poverty and helping vulnerable Americans put food on their table each day. SNAP is a lifeline for low-income and working Americans and their families. Mr. Speaker, I speak in defense of the most basic elements of America's safety net, that regardless of circumstance, no American should go hungry. These deep, drastic cuts mean that 2 million Americans risk falling through this safety net. Some 210,000 children may go hungry throughout the school day. An additional 850,000 households will have less food on their tables. In my home state, nearly 1 million South Floridians don't know where their next meal will come from, and an astonishing 300,000 of them are children. It is inexcusable for this Congress to try to balance the budget on the backs of hungry children and their families. We know that savings derived from these cuts are short-lived. When Americans are food insecure, they are more likely to be anemic and have vitamin A and protein deficiencies, all which lead to larger, more costly health issues which we all pay for. When needy children go off to school on empty stomachs, we dim their horizons and cripple their potential. We are hurting our nation's future through these severe burdens on needy families. This is not the way to find a balanced budget approach. Unfortunately, these cuts define the mindset of too many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. It is shameful for us to tell the American people that when they fall on tough times, they're on their own. With these cuts, we are limiting their potential, risking their health, and leaving our fellow Americans writhing with hunger. It is immoral. The authors of this bill should be ashamed. I urge my colleagues to oppose the $20 billion in cuts to nutrition programs in this bill, support the McGovern amendment that would restore this critical funding, oppose the rule and the Farm Bill. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back her time. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentlewoman from Florida. I do resemble that remark. I helped put this bill together, and I'm proud of it. We did it on a bipartisan basis. But we also did it in a way to try and encourage a marketplace that will become more vibrant, that will ensure that farms and farmers and families in rural areas will not only survive tough times, but be able to see an advantage for working hard. People who are farmers and ranchers get up early and go to bed late. They represent people of our country. They're the bedrock of not just men and women, they're children who go serve in our military, but they're people who care about basic American values. And in a larger sense, what this Farm Bill is doing is trying to find a way in its place in all the policy that we do to take care of people properly in this country who are the neediest, but to also ensure that we prioritize it. There are a lot of people that are my friends that are Democrats that talk about this country as a rich and powerful country. Well, we are not as rich or as powerful as we used to be. In the last 5 years, we've seen us diminish in not only stature and power, but in employment. We are falling behind because of policies in Washington, D.C. This bill is about empowering people that are in real live America. They call it flyover country. It's to help people, farmers, ranchers, communities, to deal with these issues. We're for job creation and job growth. So I hope the larger message is we need jobs in this country. Let's not just take this as just an isolated instance to say just the Farm Bill, but also the creation of jobs and job creation. 25 million people unemployed and underemployed. GDP less than 2%, where literally our country is not growing to sustain the newest generations of Americans who go to school, who go to college, to technical school, who come out and want to have a bright future. We are becoming more like Europe. We're becoming where we're beholden to a government that's bigger and more powerful, and one which drives entrepreneurship, individual responsibility out of the way. And it's some of these policies that have led to a 300% increase in people who are on food stamps over the last 10 years. We're trying to deal with a problem. I think we're going to do it in a bipartisan way, and I have confidence this bill is on the right pathway. So some may oppose that, some may not like the bill. I respect that. I respect the gentlewoman from Florida, but I do resemble that remark, and I think our product is good. I reserve our time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to the rule and urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question and no on the rule. I'm very disappointed my amendment was not made in order, a solution that was both simple and responsible. It would restore desperately needed SNAP funding, protect vital programs ranchers and growers rely on, end welfare for big oil, and responsibly reduce the deficit. By ending wasteful tax breaks for big oil, my amendment would help more than 68,000 families in Ventura counties and families across the country struggling to keep food on the table without cutting programs that California ranchers and farmers depend on, like agricultural research, disease and pest control, rural development, and conservation. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question and no on the rule. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Gentleman from Texas.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1 1/2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Maine, Ms. Pingree.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleague for yielding me time this morning, and thank you to everyone who's been on the floor to talk about the unconscionable and unthinkable cuts to the SNAP benefits program. This will have a devastating effect on my home state, as it will across the country. And I want to mention one other thing. Just over a week ago, Speaker Boehner promised a fair and open debate on the Farm Bill and said, quote, "If you have ideas on how to make the bill better, bring them forward. Let's have the debate and vote on them." Lots of people brought ideas forward, ideas that would help farmers in states like mine. But we aren't getting a chance to debate those ideas here today. The biggest programs in this bill, the revenue loss program, the price loss programs that benefit big farmers, they won't do anything for the farmers in my state or many others. They won't make them more vital, as the chair on the floor has said today. That's not going to happen. A bipartisan amendment that I submitted, and this is just one of the 117 denied consideration, would benefit diversified farmers in every state. This is an amendment that has zero cost and is supported by over 400 organizations from 46 states. It's an amendment that would help the tens of thousands of small businesses that did $5 billion in local food sales last year. I'm glad we will get to vote on the amendment to roll back the outrageous SNAP cuts in this bill. But I am very, very disappointed that local food and sustainable agriculture has been left out of the Farm Bill debate. This is not an open process. I urge my colleagues to join me in voting against the rule. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the gentlewoman is correct. The Speaker of the House, the gentleman, Mr. Boehner, did make a public statement, and he did indicate that we would be open for business at the Rules Committee. I've attempted to do everything necessary and proper to make sure that not only a fair hearing was held, but that all the people who would choose to come and make an amendment available, that the committee was available. We listened. We asked tough questions. We did. But we asked questions that I consider to be fair. I don't think one witness was discouraged at all from taking all the time they needed, but respected that we had some 200 amendments to go through. We did not rush. We took our time. We were very deliberative. We worked with the committee on a bipartisan basis. We consulted others, and we received feedback, and we have a model that I believe many people, those who, if you had come up to the Rules Committee yesterday, would say, received a fair hearing, good process. I'm for this bill. I think it's fair. I think it's balanced. I think it's really a good representation of what I'm willing to put my name on as a product to present to this House. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Massachusetts for his profound leadership on this issue. You know, I rise in opposition to this rule because there are many amendments that were not made in order, but there's plenty of pork in this farm bill to make a dead pig squeal. And I want to talk about just some of the silly things that are in this bill that were made in order as amendments for us to take up this afternoon, including pennycress as a research and development priority at the Risk Management Agency, or an amendment to direct the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture to conduct an economic analysis of the existing market for U.S. Atlantic spiny dogfish. But an amendment I had that would have given veterans waiting for disability claims to be processed the opportunity for SNAP as a disabled person was not made in order, and another amendment that would have made crop insurance subsidies that taxpayers in this country pay some $9 billion a year transparent, not in order. Now, there are 26 companies in this country, agribusinesses, that are receiving more than $1 million apiece in crop insurance premiums, but we don't get to know who they are. And that was an amendment I had that was not made in order, even though Grover Norquist thinks it should be made in order, U.S. PIRG thinks it should be made in order, Environmental Working Group thinks it should be made in order. But we're more interested in talking about...
Gentlelady, additional 30 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
But we're more interested in talking about the Atlantic spiny dogfish or the pennycress than dealing with issues around veterans accessing SNAP and whether or not the public has a right to know when we spend $9 billion a year on premium payments for crop insurance. Just another name for what has historically been a farm subsidy. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm down to the bare minimum of time I have left. I'm going to reserve my time until I close.
Gentleman reserves.
Thank
Gentleman
you,
from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire the gentleman how many more speakers he has left?
I'm at the bare minimum. I'm down to nothing, so I will close whenever the gentleman is prepared to do the same. Thank you. No speakers.
I'm prepared to close. I yield myself
from
the balance of the time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record at this time a letter that was sent to members of Congress by dozens and dozens of organizations ranging from the AFL-CIO to the Alliance to End Hunger, to Bread for the World, to Feeding America, to Food Research and Action Center, FRAC, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, Mazone, a Jewish response to hunger, Moms Rising, Share Our Strength. I go on and on and on. I'd like this to be put in the record, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, and the gentleman from Massachusetts has 4 minutes.
I thank